I will be sharing today some insights on the ongoing regulatory process at the International Seabed Authority, so the international organization that is responsible for deep seabed mining in areas beyond national jurisdiction. And within the presentation, try and slip in some lessons for early career professionals. What is deep seabed mining? I think that's a key question that I think it would be useful to get it out before going into more detail about the regulatory process. Essentially, it's the exploration and eventual exploitation of mineral deposits at depths greater than 200 meters. Some generally have the tendency to use deep seabed mining with mining activities in areas beyond national jurisdiction, so under the ISA, but actually, if you follow scientifically, the broader consensus is that as long as it's below or at depths greater than 200 meters, that would be considered as deep seabed mining. So essentially, we're talking about three resource types. We're not really speaking about oil and gas extraction at this point when we say deep seabed mining. We're primarily talking about polymetallic nodules, which are located at abyssal plains, so average depths of 4,000 to 6,000 meters. Talking about polymetallic sulfides that are typically located at hydrothermal vents at average depths of 1,400 to 3,700 meters, and cobalt-rich ferromanganese crusts that are found at seamounts at average depths of 800 to 2,400 meters. And as you can see, these resources contain metals such as nickel, cobalt, copper, manganese, and some other precious and rare earth metals, and hence they are a subject of interest for extraction. At the same time, also there are significant environmental implications coming out of deep seabed mining. These generally differ, but there are similarities across the different resource types. But in the case of polymetallic nodules, this would involve dredging and collecting these nodules. In the case of cobalt-rich crusts and sulfides, drilling and cuttings processes are involved in order to acquire these resources, and then they are transported up using a riser pipe. So naturally, the implications will be right on the seabed at the point of extraction and the dispersal of plumes. But also once they are lifted and once they go on board the ship, there will be some shipboard processing, and then the return of waste that would then go down back into the ocean. So there are multiple layers of environmental implications of deep seabed mining, which would go far beyond the point of extraction, including impacts that we're only now starting to get better understanding about, such as noise, light, and vibration, which could be potentially very significant. In terms of the distribution of these minerals can be found in areas within national jurisdiction, as well as in seabed areas beyond national jurisdiction, which under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, has been dubbed as the area. I'm sure you've seen this chart or graphic on the top right, sort of explaining how the maritime zones are allocated under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. And essentially, when we talk about the area, we're talking about the area of the seabed or the continental shelf that falls beyond the limits of national jurisdiction. Coastal states have the continental shelf that can be that go up to 200 nautical miles and can even be extended in some cases up to 350 nautical miles. And in this space, on the continental shelf or on the extended continental shelf, which is regulated under Part 6 of the Convention on the Law of the Sea, coastal states have sovereign rights to explore and exploit these resources. Of course, these sovereign rights need to be carried out in accordance with international as well as domestic environmental laws and policies, but coastal states have the jurisdiction over these minerals, which means that other states and actors cannot access these resources without the permission of the coastal states. In contrast to that, in the area, which is governed under Part 11 of the Convention, these mineral resources have been designated as the common heritage of humankind. An international organization known as the International Seabed Authority has been established in order to regulate the access to these resources as well as to ensure that exploration and exploitation of these minerals are carried out for the benefit of humankind as a whole, and the revenues are to be shared equitably. Again, if you look quickly on the chart on the right, the one in the middle, that's essentially showing us a rough estimate of where the resources or known mineral resources are thought to exist. And as you can see, the areas that are close to the coastal areas of coastal states, that's in white-ish, that's areas within national jurisdiction, and you would see quite a few resources are located in those areas, particularly polymetallic sulfides. In the case of polymetallic nodules, approximately 70% or more are thought to be found outside national jurisdiction, so basically on the international seabed area. And so there's quite a substantial amount of resources that are found within national jurisdiction, but the bulk of the mineral resources are thought to be on the international seabed. And the chart at the very bottom of the right essentially is showing us the location or the scope of the area. So the area in blue is basically the exclusive economic zone area, which corresponds with the continental shelf. But the areas in red are the areas that have either been successfully claimed or are in the process of being claimed as part of the extended continental shelf of coastal states. And it's the area beyond that that is basically falling within the remit of the International Seabed Authority. So I mentioned the International Seabed Authority and the regime for the mineral resources in areas beyond national jurisdiction falls under Part 11 of the Convention. Due to time, as well as due to the focus of this presentation, which would focus on the process of regulatory development in the International Seabed Authority, I won't be able to cover developments of seabed mining within national jurisdiction, but that's also something we can take up in the discussion if there's anyone interested in the potentiality of seabed mining in the continental shelf of coastal states such as Japan, Cook Islands, Papua New Guinea, or possibly soon in Norway as well. But focusing on the international seabed area, I wanted to draw your attention to some salient provisions in the convention. Article 136, which very clearly designates these mineral resources on the international seabed as the common heritage of humankind. And what this means is that there can be no claims or any exercise of sovereignty or sovereign rights in this place. So nobody can claim it as their own. Instead, all rights in these resources are vested in humankind as a whole, on whose behalf the International Seabed Authority acts. States can be held responsible under international law for any damage or non-compliance with Part 11. And Article 140 is an important one, saying that exploration and exploitation activities must be carried out for the benefit of humankind as a whole. Whatever financial or other economic benefits that are gained from such activities shall be distributed in an equitable mechanism to be designed by the International Seabed Authority. A very important provision is found in Article 145, which essentially requires the International Seabed Authority and the member states to take all necessary measures to ensure the effective protection of the marine environment from the harmful effects of mining activities in the area. So I mentioned the International Seabed Authority several times now. I think it's quite useful to spend a little bit of time to better understand, what this organization is. So essentially, it's an autonomous international organization that was established under the convention, and it's based or headquartered in Kingston, Jamaica. So all state parties, as long as you are a state party to the Convention on the Law of the Sea, you are automatically a member state to the International Seabed Authority. So you have the Assembly, which is the supreme organ of the ISA, the International Seabed Authority, and you have 168 states plus the European Union that are parties to the convention. In fact, just a few months ago, a new state actually joined. So initially it was 167 states, but a few months ago we welcomed Rwanda to the convention. And so now the ISA comprises 168 states in the EU. At the Assembly, each country has one vote, and the Assembly has the power to establish general policies as well as to approve mining regulations. But the council is really the executive or decision-making body of the assembly. It comprises 36 states. These states are elected by the assembly for periods of 4 years. And it's the council essentially now that is actually negotiating regulations for exploitation, as I will discuss later. But it's also the council that would decide on individual applications, mining applications that come in, on whether or not they should be approved. So I just wanted to very quickly go through this slide to sort of highlight more that, you know, or to give you a flavor of like the ISA having a multitude of responsibilities, and in some cases conflicting responsibilities. For instance, developing a system for mineral exploration and exploitation, at the same time ensuring effective protection, developing a mechanism to compensate developing countries who are basically engaged in land-based mining, whose economies would suffer from deep seabed mining, as well as to, as I've mentioned, establish an appropriate mechanism to allow for the equitable benefit sharing of whatever financial and economic benefits, to inspect, ensure compliance and exercise control over mining activities, to consider and approve individual applications, as well as to promote the conduct of marine scientific research and capacity building. So a lot of responsibilities placed on this organization. The state of affairs at the International Seabed Authority. So the ISA will be turning 30 next year, so in 2024. And that reason is because although the convention was adopted in 1982, it only entered into force in 1994. And that's the year the ISA came into existence. As mentioned, it was established under the convention, hence also came into existence with the convention. So next year would be the 30th anniversary of the ISA. Exploration activities have been going on actually for about 2 decades now, and a total of 30 contracts have been awarded. Very interestingly, the majority of these contracts have been awarded for polymetallic nodules, and most of them are found in the left of the chart that you can see here in an area known as the Clarion-Clipperton zone. So 17 contracts for nodules are found here. In the Atlantic Ocean, particularly in the mid-Atlantic Ocean, you have contracts for polymetallic sulfides. At the bottom of the South Atlantic Ocean, you would see that there is a marking there for Brazil, but we are now Brazil is now in the process of canceling that contract, as they have now claimed that area as part of their extended continental shelf. And so that contract is being revoked at the moment. And then in the Southern Indian Ocean, you have several contracts there for polymetallic sulfides, and you have India there that has a contract for polymetallic nodules. And as you move to the right of the chart, in the Western Pacific Ocean, that's where you see several contracts for seamounts. There are, I think, 3 contracts at the moment for seamounts. And then you have China sponsoring 1 contract there for polymetallic nodule exploration. So these are exploration activities that are not necessarily carried out by the states themselves, but it's more likely the case that they are sponsoring mining companies or state-owned agencies to carry out these activities under their sponsorship. There are no exploitation activities as of yet. One of the reasons being that, you know, negotiations on the regulations to actually govern these activities are still ongoing, but also, of course, there's still some lack in technological advances as well as economic viability of deep seabed mining. But one of the primary reasons that there is no exploitation activities as of yet is because the regulations are not ready. Negotiations have been ongoing at the council since 2019. But already 5 years before that, the preparatory work were carried out before the actual political negotiations started in 2019. One very interesting development is the invocation of a provision known as the 2-year rule, which was invoked by the Republic of Nauru in mid-2021 during the pandemic, which essentially provided a sort of deadline or a prescribed time for the council to complete the elaboration and adoption of the regulations for exploitation by the 9th of July, 2023. So that was about 3 months ago. Sorry, 2 months ago. Not surprisingly, the regulations were not adopted, so the council was not able to come even close to a point in time where they were able to discuss the adoption of the regulations. In fact, at the last meeting, a sort of new timeline was developed, and there was sort of understanding that, you know, even the next 2 years might be challenging to actually complete and get to a point where the regulations can be adopted. So we missed the deadline. But what happens now is that we find ourselves in a new legal reality where actually mining applications can be submitted to the ISA for consideration, despite the fact that the regulations are not yet in existence. So the convention essentially does not allow applications to be considered and approved in the absence of regulations. But this 2-year rule provision that was invoked allows a small window of opportunity where applications can actually be submitted, provided that two-year notice has been given. And since we've passed that 2-year period, applications can be submitted, and the council would be forced to consider these applications without the regulations being in place, which obviously is quite a worrying and concerning scenario. But again, you know, states have sort of said at the last meeting, especially, that commercial exploitation activities should not commence in the absence of regulation. So if an application comes in, it would be really interesting to see how the council responds and in considering such an application while the regulations remain absent. So the negotiations at the moment, they are moving along. As I will come to later, we will have another meeting for negotiations at the end of October. And as negotiations are moving along, calls for a pause or a moratorium on deep seabed mining continue to grow. So you have, you know, the European Parliament, the IUCN Congress, as well as private businesses such as Google, BMW, Volvo, Samsung, and others. Also, a lot of financial institutions that have decided to not support deep seabed mining, as well as a group of, I think now, over 700 marine scientists and policy experts, myself included, and perhaps some others in this conversation here today, have also signed on to a marine expert statement calling for a pause to deep seabed mining that was released last year. And very recently, more and more governments are also calling for a pause, a moratorium, or in the case of France, a ban on deep seabed mining. And by my count, that's now about 21 governments that have actually come out openly and asked for a moratorium on deep seabed mining. Current developments, where do we stand in the negotiations? So the negotiations are progressing through what is called working groups. So we have one working group on the financial terms, essentially how much contractors would have to pay the ISA in terms of royalties and profit sharing once exploitation activities commence. We have a working group on institutional matters. So essentially what happens when an application comes in, who considers it, what sort of evaluation criteria applies, and how decision-making structures would work. We have a working group on the environment, on the protection and preservation on the environment. So considering issues like environmental impact assessments, as well as standards and guidelines and environmental thresholds. We have a working group on inspection, compliance, and enforcement. So how would the activities of contractors be inspected? What would the mechanism for compliance be? And in the case of non-compliance, how would enforcement action be taken? And then for the fifth group, we actually are dealing with it in the plenary of the council, basically called under the President's Tax or the President's Group, which deals with everything else. And I put this chart on the right here to basically explain or lay out which provisions in the regulations fall under which working group. And so we have about 107 regulations, and these are spread across the different working groups, as well as the annexes, as well as you can see at the bottom, spread between the President's Group and the environmental group. At this point in time, since we had the last meeting in July that ended in July, and the decision was taken to continue negotiations in the coming months, written textual proposals, so to comment on the text itself, that is due until the 15th of September, so next Friday. And the next council meetings to negotiate or to continue negotiations will be in November, March next year, and July next year. there are still many unresolved issues. So we're still quite far from coming to a point where the regulations could be in a state where they are ready for adoption. Most of the text is currently in red and in square brackets. And I would anticipate with this new round of written proposals, we would have even more red text and square bracketed text. But it's not just the regulations that need agreement. There are many other items that also need agreement. I mentioned some earlier about the need to develop a mechanism for the equitable sharing of benefits, or the need to develop a system of compensation for developing countries who are land-based mining countries. And we haven't started that conversation yet. What's also unclear is the link to other international processes. Fortunately, I don't have to cover this because we have the BBNJ presentation that's coming up next, but also discussion under the CBD and the Global Biodiversity Framework that came up yesterday as well. So I'm going to end the presentation very soon. I just wanted to sort of share some reflections on how do we get involved, or how would one get involved in the knowledge to policy interface at the ISA. I think one very important, starting point is to, get abreast and stay updated with the developments at the ISA. Another point is to collaborate. I think it's very important to seek out others who are working in this space, to get to look for opportunities to collaborate, as well as, in the case of the ISA, what I found very interesting and had to learn the hard way is that a lot of suggestions, a lot of points were actually discussed years ago, and they have been dismissed for particular reasons. And so it's very important to sort of, find out where things stand, which ideas have been accepted and which ideas have been rejected. And this would take a lot of time as well. So it would be really useful to reach out to those that have been attending the process for some years, including Matt Gianni, who spoke yesterday, who was very helpful to me when I first started getting into the space. And as well as others, like, including Beth as well, who's been coming to the ISA recently. Publications, that's a really important way to get involved in the process. Also, it could come from the side of, just summarizing the science and putting it down under a science brief, as well as policy briefs. So like taking that knowledge and science into and converting it into policy sort of implications. And it should not just be limited to science, but also other forms of knowledge, including traditional and indigenous knowledge. And if you look at the graphics on the right, that's essentially me giving presentations to delegates at the last meeting on some of the discussion papers that I've wrote on this topic of the 2-year rule, as well as the deadline having expired. Other ways, to write blogs, to write op-eds, to organize webinars, as well as public events. Liza is on the call here today and will be one of the moderators, but we recently put together an event more for the public in Geneva, and that I found was very useful. For those of us who are involved in teaching, very important to include subjects like deep seabed mining in our syllabus, because it's through teaching that others get more informed about this, as well as interested to occupy this space. Getting involved in capacity building programs, this is something that is very important, and I take quite seriously in sort of developing training programs for delegates that actually attend the meeting, so that they are fully aware of the state of play at the ISA. Reaching out to national delegates, including your home country, as well as other countries that you live in or work at. I think this is very important, sort of introducing yourself, your expertise, and saying that you're available to provide any sort of support, as well as to encourage the national delegations to hold consultations. And that's something that at RIFS we have been quite successful with Germany in sort of hosting regular stakeholder consultations at the national level, involving scientists and other stakeholders in direct conversation with the delegates that actually attend the negotiations at the ISA. You could also participate in intersessional work, and at the moment, as I mentioned, comments are open for the regulations. which typically would be, through an observer member. But, it's also possible, and I've done this before some years ago, submitting comments as a private person. There's also other intersessional working groups, which actually nominations are currently open. So if you have environmental expertise in deep sea toxicology or, in underwater noise and so on, there's actually a call for nominations to join an expert group, an intersessional expert group, to work on binding environmental thresholds at the moment. So that's something, an opportunity to look into. Of course, attending the meetings in person, getting involved in on-site side events where you could, present a paper or some relevant policy findings, as well as being there to engage in informal discussions. So that's the end of the presentation, but I wanted to just take a minute to sort of explain my role and how I got there. So I've been attending ISA meetings for, I guess, over 5 years now. I've been to Jamaica for maybe 7 times or so. And I've, previously I've been attending as part of RIFS, actually. Previously, we were known as the Institute for Advanced Sustainability Studies, and you would see the picture on the top right there. And in more recent times, I've been attending as part of the delegation for the IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and I'm a legal advisor to the IUCN on deep seabed mining issues. And at the IUCN, there's actually a lot of opportunity to get involved, as the IUCN has about 7 independent commissions, so about 19,000 experts fall within this independent commissions of the IUCN. And I'm part of 2 of these commissions. One is the World Commission on Environmental Law, where I co-lead the Ocean Law Specialist Group. And the other one is the Commission on Ecosystem Management, where I lead the deep seabed mining thematic group. And in that capacity, as an external expert to the IUCN, I've been invited to attend and represent the IUCN at the ISA meeting. So as I said, sort of plenty of opportunities to get involved, although of course there are, you do require a lot of support and also a lot of, assistance for doors to be open for you. I'm happy to take questions, and my email address is there. So if you have any questions or insights, I'd be more than happy to share. Thank you.